In Halcyon Quay, the streets moved when no one was looking. Not in the cartoon way, not with asphalt sliding like a rug, but in the subtler way, a city can rearrange itself through paperwork. A sidewalk, temporarily closed for construction that never ends. An alley renamed and then forgotten. A bus route redirected until an entire block becomes unreachable by accident. People called it renewal. The people who lost their homes called it theft. I called it a puzzle, because puzzles are safer than grief. My name is Juniper Vale, and I make maps for a living. Maps that politely ignore the ways power folds a city like paper. That year, the mayor's office had hired me to help draft a wayfinding modernization plan, which meant I spent my days tracing blue lines on screens while my neighbor Mrs. Kaito measured her pantry in spoonfuls. It was summer. The fog was thick, and every official memo in my inbox smelled faintly of denial. The first sign something was truly wrong arrived as a piece of paper wedged into the library return slot, caught between two overdue romance novels like a secret trying to escape fiction. The paper was thick, cream-colored, folded into a square. No title, no legend, no publisher. Across the front, in ink the color of dried kelp, was a single sentence written in careful block letters. If you want your city back, stop following the signs. I should have handed it to the librarian. I should have laughed and gone home. Instead, I slid it into my tote bag and carried it to my apartment above a fishmonger who smoked too much and swore even more. When I unfolded the map on my kitchen table, my breath caught. It wasn't a tourist map. It wasn't even a municipal map. It was Halcyon Quay, as it existed under the official story and under the unofficial one at the same time. Every lane behind the promenade, every service tunnel, every boarded-up stairway leading to nowhere. More disturbing, certain blocks were drawn in dotted ink as if uncertain, and along the eastern edge where the city met the marsh, an entire blank space had been outlined but not filled, labeled only with a number. Lean. Under my fingers, the paper felt warm, the way a sunlit stone feels warm, except the room was dim and the stove was off. My phone buzzed, the screen lit with a notification from an app I didn't remember installing. The icon was a spiral shell. The message read, "New route available." Then, before I could react, my navigation arrow spun and pointed straight at my own front door. I stared at the phone, then at the map. My heartbeat made the paper quiver. Then the map did something no map should do. A thin line appeared where none existed before, as if ink were traveling under the fibers. The line curved from my building down Bryan Street, around the corner by the shuttered cinema, and ended at a small spiral symbol drawn like a shell. Beneath it, in that kelp-colored ink, words formed as if written by an invisible hand. Record's office after hours. Bryan Street was quiet at dusk, the kind of quiet that comes from tourists being shepherded toward brighter districts. Fog curled around street lamps and softened everything into watercolor. I followed the line, trying not to look like someone obeying a haunted map. The shuttered cinema had been closed for years, its poster cases still displaying faded films with smiling actors who had never known municipal zoning. A side door, once chained, hung slightly open. My phone buzzed. If you follow the signs, you'll miss the door. I pushed the door wider and stepped inside. The lobby smelled of velvet and stale popcorn. The carpet was patterned with stars worn down by feet long gone. Somewhere deeper inside, a sharp sound echoed. Thunk a stamp. Then again. Thunk, thunk. Like someone stamping forms with grim devotion. I crept through torn curtains into the projection room and found a woman seated at the projection desk. She looked about 60, sleeves rolled up, hair pinned back, as if she had been working too long to care about looking official. She was stamping papers in a steady rhythm with a heavy brass stamp shaped like a spiral shell. Each time it struck, the air pulsed faintly. She did not look surprised to see me. "You brought it," she said, without asking what it was. Her voice was dry as paper. "I didn't know I began." She held up a hand. "No explanations," she said. "Explanations waste ink. Sit." I sat because my body apparently respected bureaucracy even in mythic form. She nodded at the map in my hands. "Custodian," she said. Finally. I was beginning to think the library would rot before it delivered another. "Who are you?" I managed. The woman pressed the stamp down one last time, then set it aside as if setting down a weapon. "Ada Lorne," she said. "Records office. Formerly municipal. Currently. Stubborn." She leaned forward. "They're borrowing streets again," she said, and I felt the phrase like a hook. "Borrowing," I repeated. Ada's eyes were sharp. "Stealing, but with receipts," she corrected. Ada explained in the way someone explains a disaster to a person who still believes in rules. Halcyon Quay, she said, had been built on marshland that resented being mapped. The marsh did not like straight lines. It wanted water to wander. Long ago, the founders made an agreement. The city would get stability, and the marsh would keep the right to reclaim whatever humans forgot. In those days, when a street flooded, people accepted it as weather and adapted. Then Quaybridge Development arrived with engineers, money, and a solution that came with clauses. They offered dynamic zoning, flood resilience, adaptive corridors. What they actually built was a system that could lift a street off the public map temporarily, officially, and reroute ownership, liability, and access in a single overnight cycle. "They don't demolish," Ada said. "They refile." She pointed at her stamp. "A stamp is stronger than a shovel in this city." She opened a drawer and pulled out a stack of thin forms, each one bearing the spiral shell watermark. "Borrow all forms," she said. "Quaybridge files them against the city's ledger, and the city approves them because the city is addicted to paperwork. Streets get borrowed for maintenance, flood risk, public safety. People get relocated, businesses get bought out, and when the street returns, if it returns empty." My mouth went dry. "Why hasn't anyone stopped them?" I asked. Ada's laugh was short. "People tried," she said. "They were told their street never existed." She pushed a slip of paper toward me. It looked like a library checkout receipt. Across it, in official language, was a sentence that made my blood chill. "Temporary custodianship of a disputed cartographic asset is hereby granted to Juniper Vale." Under it was a blank line labeled "Signature of Custodian." Ada tapped the line. "Your signature makes a street real," she said. "If you mark it before the borrowal cycle completes, the system has to reconcile. And reconciliation is hard. It cracks." "Why me?" I whispered. Ada's gaze flicked to my hands. "Because you draw," she said. "And because you have no power, which makes you useful. Powerful people are expensive to move. Powerless people are easy to blame." She gestured at the map. "The marsh doesn't choose mayors. It chooses hands." My phone buzzed. "First borrowed street, Briar's Cut. Time window, 1:17. Briar's Cut sat behind the renovated marina, where Quaybridge liked to host ribbon cuttings. Officially, the space behind the marina was a solid block of restricted development. In reality, I found a chain-link fence with a private, no trespassing sign, and, beyond it, an alley too narrow to matter. The map's line led directly through the fence. My phone buzzed. "You can't ask permission to walk on a lie." So I climbed. Fog slicked the metal. My palms burned. On the other side, the alley opened into a small square that should not have fit 3 abandoned buildings folded into a pocket of city. A corner store with dusty shelves, a narrow house with a porch swing, and a tiny daycare with cartoon animals painted on its door. The cheerfulness of the faded animals made my throat tighten. In the center stood a concrete utility box painted with Quaybridge's sleek logo. It hummed. The air around it shimmered, and a corridor appeared like a page turning cold blue light. Server rack hum, the smell of ozone. I ran in because my fear had no better instruction. Inside, a terminal displayed an interface like a bureaucrat's dream. Select street to borrow. Reason. Flood risk. Liability. Externalized. A list of street names blinked, some familiar, some not, and one line pulsed. Next in Quay. Wren's turn. Time. 1:17. A stack of forms sat beside the terminal, each with a street name and a spiral stamp. I grabbed the top form for Briar's Cut and saw that it had already been pre-approved, stamped, countersigned. The city's complicity in ink. My hands shook as I tore the form in half, then into quarters, then into confetti. I didn't know if paper violence would matter, but it felt honest. Then I yanked a permanent marker from my bag because a Mapmaker always carries a marker and scrawled across the utility box, "This street exists." My letters were crooked. My signature underneath was worse. But as soon as the ink hit, the blue corridor flickered, the hum stuttered, and the shimmer gate snapped shut with a sound like paper tearing. Outside, the machinery grind that had been building in my bones eased, as if disappointed. Briar's Cut didn't become bright and safe, but it felt present. like a room someone had stopped pretending wasn't there. When I returned to Ada, breathless, she looked at my scraped hands and nodded once. "Good," she said softly. "Now we do it again. Wren's Turn is not an alley. It's a neighborhood, and people live there. Ada couldn't come with me. I'm tied to the stamp," she said, gesturing at the spiral shell. "If I leave, the records office collapses fully. It's barely holding as it is." Instead, she handed me 2 things: a roll of bright orange survey tape and an old fountain pen heavy enough to feel like an heirloom. "Marker fades," she said. "Ink bites." She paused, then added, almost reluctantly, "And visibility helps. The city hates being looked at directly." My phone buzzed. Route to Wren's Turn available. At 12:49, I reached the old water tower on the east side, a rusted cylinder surrounded by weeds. Officially, the area was a heritage zone. Practically, it was a buffer between downtown development and the marsh. My arrow pointed toward a gap between concrete barriers. There was no sign, no path, yet when I squeezed through, my foot hit pavement. A narrow street unrolled in front of me like it had been waiting. Small houses leaned toward one another. A mural of birds stretched across a long brick wall. The paint faded but still determined. A dog barked from a yard, and a woman stepped onto a porch holding a flashlight like a weapon. "Who are you?" she called. Her voice was firm, the tired you earn from holding ground. "My name is Juniper," I called back, hands raised. "I'm a mapmaker," she snorted. "We don't get tourists," she said. "No one finds Wren's Turn." "I didn't find it," I said honestly. "I was sent." Her light flicked to the orange tape in my hand, then to the map. Her face changed. Not softened, but sharpened into recognition. "Ada," she said, as if tasting a memory. "Ada sent you." She motioned. "Come inside," she said, and the command in her voice made me obey. Her name was Maris Wren, which felt too perfect to be coincidence. And when I sat at her kitchen table, I met the rest of Wren's Turn. A mechanic named Dev, who sorted screws like prayers, a nurse named Isla with tired eyes, an elderly couple who held hands like they'd survived worse, a teacher who had stayed because leaving felt like surrender. They didn't trust me yet, but they trusted the map in a way that hurt. "Quaybridge tried to buy us out," Maris said. "Then they tried to scare us out. Then they told the city our street was unsafe. If the city borrows us, we vanish on paper. No mail, no deliveries, no emergency response. We die by omission." My phone buzzed. Relocation cycle, 117. The streetlights flickered as if on cue. At 1:12, the air shifted colder, fog thickening like a held breath. The mural birds dulled, as if their color were being drained. From the street's entrance near the water tower, a low hum rose, the same hum I'd heard at Briar's Cut. A man in a reflective vest appeared with 2 security guards and a tablet. His smile was municipal. "Good evening," he called, voice amplified by a speaker clipped to his collar. "This is an authorized notice of temporary street reallocation for flood safety. Please remain calm. Compensation forms are available." He held up a clipboard, and the spiral shell watermark gleamed under streetlight. Maris stepped forward, flashlight still in her hand like a baton. "This street isn't for sale," she said. The man's smile tightened. "It's not a sale," he said smoothly. "It's a borrowal. Temporary. We're protecting you." Behind him, the air shimmered, and the outline of a blue-lit corridor began to appear, bleeding through reality like ink through thin paper. My phone buzzed. "They will call it safety. They mean vacancy." I swallowed hard and tore off a length of orange survey tape. I stretched it across the street entrance, anchoring it to a fence post on one side and a mailbox on the other. The tape stuck to nothing and everything at once. It snapped taut, as if held by invisible hands. The shimmer gate trembled. The vest man's eyes narrowed. "Remove that," he snapped, losing calm. A guard reached for the tape. The moment his gloved fingers touched it, frost spread across his glove like spilled ink. He yelped and jerked back. The air smelled suddenly of marsh water and wet reeds. A wind rose from nowhere, carrying the sound of distant cattails. People on porches gasped. Ela whispered, "The marsh is listening." The vest man, desperate, slammed his stamp device down onto the pavement repeatedly. Thunk, 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 trying to force the borrowal through by brute bureaucracy. Each stamp hit with a pulse that made the mural birds fade further. The shimmer gate expanded, sucking at the air like a hungry mouth. Ada's warning flashed through my mind. Don't bargain with a hungry system. Juniper, Maris said, voice low. What do we do? My hands shook. I pulled out the fountain pen Ada had given me, uncapped it, and stepped onto the street itself. Everyone, I called, louder than my fear. Stand on your own pavement. The neighbors moved, hesitant but united, stepping off porches, onto the street. Children peeked from doorways. Dev took the elderly couple's hands and guided them forward. I pressed the pen tip to the pavement and wrote, in ink that somehow bled into stone, Wren's turn exists. My signature beneath it felt like carving my name into the city's skin. The street pulsed under my feet. The shimmer gate shrieked silently. The vest man lunged toward me, but the orange tape snapped upward like a whip, slamming into his chest and sending him stumbling back. The security guards raised batons. Their batons sparked uselessly in the damp air. The marsh wind rose harder, and for an instant, the fog parted to show a line of water running under the pavement, a hidden creek asserting itself. The stamp device in the vest man's hand cracked. The spiral watermark on his form smeared as if the ink couldn't hold its shape. The shimmer gate flickered, then stalled. On my phone, the countdown froze at 1:17 and began to reverse. A sound like 1,000 papers shuffling filled the street. The air snapped cold, then warmed. The mural birds regained color, not fully, but enough to feel alive. The shimmer gate collapsed inward, folding like a tent struck down, and the blue corridor vanished. The vest man stared at his tablet as if it had betrayed him. This is impossible, he hissed. Reconciliation failure. His speaker chirped in a sterile voice. Asset disputed. Custodian override detected. The man's eyes snapped to me. Who are you? He demanded, voice cracking. A mapmaker, I said, and to my surprise my voice didn't shake. And this street is not yours. The man backed away, breathing hard, and the security guards followed, their confidence drained. They retreated through the water tower gap, and the moment they passed, the gap looked like plain concrete again. The street's edge shimmered once, as if sealing. People around me exhaled, some laughing in disbelief, others crying quietly. Maris gripped my arm, her fingers strong. That worked, she said, as if the sentence tasted unfamiliar. For tonight, Ada had said, but they'll return. My phone buzzed again, and my stomach sank. Next reallocation target, Tideglass Walk. Time window, 2:06. Ada had told me Wren's Turn was a neighborhood. Tideglass Walk, I knew, was a seaside boardwalk lined with small stalls and old apartments, prime real estate for Quaybridge's next resilience project. We can't do this one street at a time, Dev said, voice tight. Isla nodded. They'll outpace you, she said. Maris looked toward the fog-wrapped city center. We need daylight, she said. They borrow at night because paper loves darkness. I thought of Ada in the cinema, stamping forms alone like a lighthouse keeper. We need a public map, I said slowly, the idea forming like ink under fibers. A map that shows the borrowed streets and the blank spaces. A map everyone can see and share. If visibility is leverage, we need leverage. Maris's eyes narrowed. Can you make that? She asked. I looked down at the haunted map in my hand, warm as a pulse. With help, I said, and with a stamp. We went back to the cinema before dawn, a small group moving through fog like conspirators. Ada was waiting, as if she had never stopped. When she saw Maris, her face softened into something like pain. You're still there, Ada whispered. Maris's jaw clenched. You left, she said. Ada nodded once. I couldn't stay, she said. Not physically, but I stayed on paper. Ada looked at me. You felt it, she said. The gate tried to swallow the street. It's hungry. Quaybridge built their system by feeding it emptiness. How do we starve it? I asked. Ada's eyes flicked to the old projector behind her. We flood it with records, she said. With names, with stories that refuse to be erased. The city's ledger can't reconcile with too much truth. She opened a cabinet and pulled out a heavy file marked Public Works Original Survey. Inside were hand-drawn maps from decades ago, before Quaybridge's blue lines. We make a countermap, Ada said. We stamp it into existence. The countermap took 3 days and 2 nights, because sleep is what a city steals first. We worked in the cinema, surrounded by torn posters and dust, turning the projection room into a war room. Ada brought out old files, original street surveys, flood maps, handwritten resident petitions that had never been processed. Maris brought people, elders who remembered where alleys used to run, fishers who knew where storm drains led, children who drew shortcuts they used when adults weren't watching. Dev stole a printer from his garage and wired it to an ancient laptop. Isla bribed a municipal clerk she once saved in the ER to get access codes for public GIS layers. And I, Juniper, drew until my wrist burned, layering official lines with unofficial ones, marking the dotted streets as solid, filling in the blank zero space with what it actually was. A marsh neighborhood called Reedlight, home to families who lived on stilts and didn't appear in tourist brochures. Each time we added a street, Ada stamped the corner with her spiral shell, thunk, and the air pulsed like the city acknowledging a fact it had been avoiding. The map grew huge paper sheets taped together across the projection wall. We didn't have a title, so Maris wrote one in thick marker. Halcyon Quay as it exists. On the fourth night, my phone buzzed with a message that made my stomach drop. Quay Bridge will initiate mass reallocation. Target, Reedlight. Time window, 3. They're going for the blank space, Ada said softly, and there was fury under her calm. They want to erase the marsh neighborhood entirely and sell the shore. Maris's face went pale. Reedlight is where my aunt lives, she said. They can't. They will, Isla said. Unless we stop it in public. Ada turned toward the old projector. We're out of quiet options, she said. It's time to project the truth. The plan was insane and simple. Use the cinema's projector to cast the countermap onto the fog at the harbor promenade where cameras and tourists were, where the mayor liked to stroll for photo ops, where Quaybridge's office tower watched everything. We would make the city see itself. We rolled the huge map carefully, like a sacred banner, and carried it through fog toward the waterfront as if smuggling a storm. At the promenade, the air smelled of salt and fried food, and tourists in ponchos took selfies with the lighthouse. None of them noticed the old cinema projector on a cart until Dev plugged it into a municipal outlet, and the machine whined awake like a revived beast. Ada adjusted the lens with trembling fingers. I fed the map into the projection frame, and then, across the fog above the water, Halcyon Quay appeared in ghostly light. Streets, names, blank spaces filled, dotted lines made solid, and most damning sections outlined in red, labeled borrowed by Quaybridge. People stopped. Phones lifted. Murmurs rose like wind. Is that my street? Someone whispered. Why is it red? Another asked. A tourist laughed uncertainly. A vendor crossed herself. On my phone, the countdown to Reedlight's mass reallocation began. 2:59. Ada's voice, amplified through a cheap speaker, cut through the murmurs. This is the city you live in, she said, not the one they print on brochures. The first official response arrived in the form of a man in a suit and a woman with a municipal badge, both moving fast with the confidence of people who believed authority could turn off light. This projection is unauthorized, the badge woman said sharply. It violates public signage code. Ada smiled, and the smile looked like paper cuts. So does stealing streets, she said. The suit man stepped closer to the projector cart. Turn it off, he said. Dev planted himself between the man and the plug. No, Dev said simply. Around us, a crowd formed, drawn by the glowing map and the energy of something forbidden. People filmed. People shouted questions. Someone recognized Maris and yelled, Ren's turn is real. Someone else yelled, My delivery driver says my address doesn't exist. The badge woman's face tightened. This is misinformation, she insisted, and a laugh burst from the crowd, not amused but angry. A television crew arrived because Halcyon Quay loved conflict as long as it was photogenic. The reporter, hair perfect despite fog, lifted a microphone. What is this? She asked. Ada looked at the camera, and for a moment, the old woman's exhaustion became something fierce. Records, Ada said. Receipts. The truth they told you was a filing error. On my phone, the countdown continued. 1:44. The map projection rippled as fog shifted, but Ada adjusted the lens, keeping the red-outlined Reedlight visible. Across the water, in the windows of Quaybridge's office tower, lights flickered on. Someone was watching. Then the promenade speakers normally used for tourist announcements crackled, and a polished voice filled the air. Attention residents, it said. For your safety, please disperse. An emergency flood mitigation protocol is being initiated. People looked around, confused. Flood? Someone asked, glancing at the calm water. The polished voice continued. The area known as Reed Light is designated high risk. Evacuation is required. Maris swore under her breath. They're using flood safety as cover, Isla said, jaw clenched. They're about to borrow it with the whole city watching. Ada's stamp hand trembled, then steadied. She slammed the spiral stamp down onto the projector's map frame. Thunk again. The projection brightened. Lines sharpened. Names became clearer. The crowd's phones caught it. Reed Light, Ada said into the speaker, voice loud now. You are not a risk. You are a neighborhood. You are people. The polished voice tried to speak again, but Dev had anticipated this. He yanked a cable, and the promenade speakers died with a squeal. The crowd cheered. On my phone, 058. Fog thickened suddenly, rolling in like a curtain. The projection cut through it. A glowing map floating above the water like a promise. Then, at the far end of the promenade, the shimmer began the same blue-lit corridor bleeding into reality, but bigger, bolder, because Quaybridge wasn't hiding anymore. Security guards appeared. A line of reflective vest workers advanced carrying clipboards and stamp devices. And behind them, a woman in a white raincoat stepped forward, her hair sleek, her eyes bright with practiced sincerity. I'm Director Sable Rook, she announced, voice amplified by her own portable system. Quaybridge Development. We are here to protect Halcyon Quay from catastrophic flooding by initiating a temporary reallocation of unsafe zones. The crowd booed. Sable smiled. Please remain calm, she said. Compensation is available. Maris shouted. Our homes aren't your asset. Sable's gaze flicked to the projection. For the first time, her smile faltered. Just slightly. Interesting, she said softly. She raised a small device, a stamp scanner, and pointed it at the projected map. Custodian stamp detected. Her device chirped. Ada Lorne, Sable said, voice sharpening. We thought you were dead. Ada lifted her chin. You can't kill records, she said. The countdown hit 012. The shimmer gate expanded, wind sucking at the promenade. People screamed as their hats flew. The projection trembled. I held the map frame steady with both hands, knuckles white. Juniper, Ada hissed beside me. Your signature alone won't hold Reed Light. We need theirs. We need the people who live there to claim it in ink. How? I gasped. Ada's eyes flicked toward the crowd. Give them the pen, she said. Make the city witness a collective signature. We didn't have time to debate. I yanked the fountain pen from my pocket and thrust it toward the nearest person in the crowd, a middle-aged man with wet cheeks who looked like he'd been holding anger for years. Sign, I said, voice hoarse. If you know a street that's been erased, write its name. If you live in Reed Light, write Reed Light. The man blinked, then grabbed the pen like a lifeline and scrawled on a blank strip of paper Dev shoved at him. My street is Seagrove Alley. The ink looked too dark, too alive. I tore off orange survey tape and slapped it onto the projector cart, making a sticky patchwork panel. Stick it, I told him. He did. The moment the paper hit the tape, the projection flickered, and a new line appeared on the glowing map. Seagrove Alley exists. The crowd reacted like a wave. People surged forward. I have one, someone yelled. They changed our address. Another shouted. We never got mail after the renovation. Hands reached for the pen. Isla began organizing without thinking, because nurses know how to manage crowds in emergencies. One at a time, she barked. Write clearly. Name and street. Dev ripped paper into strips. Maris held the tape panel steady. The pen moved from hand to hand, and each time someone wrote a street name, the projection sharpened, expanding, as if the map were feeding on testimony instead of emptiness. Sable Rook watched, her face tightening. Stop that, she snapped, and her security moved forward. The shimmer gate behind her roared like a giant inhaling. The flood protocol lights along the promenade flashed. The countdown on my phone hit 0, and then impossibly stalled. Reconciliation and progress, it read. The system, confronted with too much ink, hesitated. Sable's stamp scanner whined. Anomaly detected, it chirped. Sable's eyes flashed. Quaybridge will proceed, she said, voice hard now. Citizens are not authorized to amend municipal records. Ada stepped forward, holding her spiral stamp like a judge's gavel. They are the record, Ada said. Your paperwork is just ink that forgot what it stands for. Sable raised her scanner and slammed it onto a Quaybridge form. Thunk, heavy. A pulse shot through the promenade, and the fog turned colder. The projection wavered. Several paper strips fluttered loose from the tape panel, and the corresponding lines on the map dimmed. People cried out. "Hold them!" Maris shouted, grabbing the tape edges. I pressed my hands against the panel, feeling the paper strips tremble like nervous birds. The pen moved again, faster. Someone wrote Readlight Lives. Someone else wrote the names of streets inside Readlight. Cattail Row, Lantern Dock, Mudwalk Pass. With each name, the projection brightened around the marsh edge, filling in the blank, zero space, until it glowed. The Shimmergate stuttered. Sable's jaw clenched. "Fine," she hissed. "If you want ink, you can drown in it." She tapped her badge device. Behind her, the blue corridor expanded into multiple corridors, branching like a bureaucratic hydra. Workers rushed forward with stacks of forms, stamp devices slamming down in a drumbeat. Thunk, thunk, thunk. Precise. The air vibrated. People screamed. A gust tore across the promenade, ripping the tape panel's corner loose. The projection dimmed, and for a moment, I saw the city's official map trying to reassert itself, blanking Readlight again like an eraser. Ada grabbed my wrist, nails sharp. "The stamp!" she hissed. "Juniper. If you want the city back, you have to stamp something they can't ignore." I stared at her spiral stamp. "I can't use your stamp," I said, terrified. Ada's eyes softened, just once. "You can," she said, "because I'm not the custodian anymore." She thrust the stamp into my hands. It was heavier than it looked, warm, like living metal. "But," I began. Ada's voice dropped. "I was a person," she said. "Now I'm a record. They borrowed me too, Juniper. Years ago. They filed my death. They stamped my absence. I stayed because I refused to reconcile." The fog around her shimmered, and for the first time I noticed. Ada's edges were slightly blurred, as if she existed half on paper. "Take the stamp," she said. "Do what I couldn't." Behind us, Sable's workers advanced. The crowd pushed back. The pen scratched frantically. The map projection flickered like a heartbeat. I lifted the spiral stamp, hands shaking, and looked for a surface that could hold a city's truth. My gaze landed on the promenade's stone plaque, a tourist marker that read Halcyon Quay Promenade renovated by Quaybridge Development. It was the city's brag, carved into stone. I ran to it, shoved aside a startled tourist, and slammed the stamp down onto the plaque. Thunk, louder. The air cracked. The plaque's letters dimmed, and new letters burned into the damp stone as if ink could etch granite. Halcyon Quay as it exists. The projection surged brighter, locking onto the stamped phrase like a hook. Sable screamed, "No!" and lunged toward me, but the fog wind rose, and a wall of damp air slammed between us. The Shimmergates shrieked and began to fold inward, collapsing as if the city's own records had rejected their paperwork. On my phone, a message flashed in bold. Custodianship transfer complete. Public record status. Witnessed. The moment the stamp hit stone, something in Halcyon Quay shifted. It wasn't magic fireworks. It was a bureaucratic earthquake. 1,000 tiny assumptions snapping at once. People's phones buzzed with municipal notifications they had never seen before. Address validation update. Street status restored. Service route reconciled. A delivery driver near the crowd yelled, "My app just found my route." Someone else sobbed, "My mother's address is back." The Shimmergates collapsed like folding screens, their blue light thinning into fog. Quaybridge workers staggered, stamp devices sputtering. Sable Rook stumbled back, raincoat flapping. Her polished calm cracked. "This isn't legal," she spat. Ada, still beside the projector, edges shimmering, laughed softly. "Legal is just the city telling itself a story," she said. Tonight, it remembered a different story. Security tried to push forward, but the crowd had momentum now, not violent but immovable. People held up their paper strips like flags. "My street," they chanted, and the chant spread, names filling the promenade. Seagrove Alley, Pike Steps, Cattail Row, Wren's Turn, Readlight. It was messy, human, uncoordinated, and therefore powerful. Sable's gaze flicked to the stamped plaque, and then to Ada. "You can't hold this," she hissed. "The city will reconcile. It always does." Ada's smile turned sad. Maybe, she said. But reconciliation takes time, and time is exactly what you've been stealing. Ada looked at me, eyes bright and tired. Go to Readlight, she whispered. They'll try a different way. They'll send inspectors. They'll claim safety violations. They'll cut services. But now you have leverage, visibility, the map, the stamp. Use them. Her form shimmered more strongly, as if the stamp's transfer had loosened her. Ada, Maris said, voice breaking. Come with us. Ada shook her head. I'm already everywhere the map is, she said gently. That's enough. Then, like a paper page turning, Ada thinned and faded, leaving only the spiral stamp's echo in my hands and a faint smell of old ink in the air. The projector whined, then steadied, projecting the countermap across the fog like a lantern. The news crew shoved closer, microphones out. Who are you? The reporter demanded, breathless. I swallowed, suddenly aware of my wet hair, my shaking hands, the stamp heavy as a verdict. Juniper Vale, I said into the camera. Mapmaker. And I'm telling you, this city has been filing people out of existence. The reporter's eyes widened. Behind her, the crowd cheered. Not for me, but for the possibility of being seen. Sable Rook retreated toward her office tower, face tight, already recalculating. The battle wasn't over. But for the first time, Halcyon Quay's stolen streets were speaking their names out loud. The next days were chaos in the way truth always is when it breaks through. Quaybridge issued statements about misleading projections and unauthorized mapping events, but the public mesh was flooded with screenshots of the glowing map, videos of the stamp imprint on stone, and lists of restored addresses. People who had been told for years they were off-grid woke to find their mail apps working, their emergency services acknowledging them, their tax records suddenly confused. The city council held emergency sessions. The mayor, looking sweatier than fog could justify, announced an independent review. Citizens from Rensturn and Readlight showed up in the council hall with paper strips taped to their shirts like badges. Exists. Isla testified with clinical fury about patients lost because ambulances couldn't locate invalid streets. Dev explained how utilities had been cut the night before borrowal cycles. Maris stood at the podium and said, calm as a tide. You can't flood us with paperwork anymore. We learned to write back. I spent those weeks drawing and printing and projecting the countermap in different places. On warehouse walls, on school gym floors, on the side of the Quaybridge Tower itself one night when Dev and some teenagers borrowed a drone projector and dared the city to look. Every projection gathered crowds. Every crowd gathered more names. The map grew, not just in lines, but in stories. People began bringing me old photographs showing street signs that had vanished. They brought handwritten letters with addresses that no longer existed. They brought memory, which is the one resource Quaybridge could not easily invoice. Meanwhile, Quaybridge changed tactics. They stopped trying to borrow streets openly at night. Instead, they sent inspectors in daylight to issue safety violations, to condemn houses, to post evacuation notices. They cut trash pickup. They threatened fines. It was death by compliance rather than erasure. But now, every time a notice appeared, someone photographed it and pinned it onto the countermap with a red tag. The city's shame became visible. And visibility, Ada had been right, is leverage. In mid-September, the council announced a marsh safety initiative that sounded benign until you read the fine print. Readlight would be relocated to a new housing complex inland, and the marsh edge would be redeveloped into a storm buffer park, sponsored by Quaybridge. It was the same theft, wearing a softer hat. Readlight's residents, people who had lived on stilts and built their own flood-proof lives, refused. They want to move us so the land is empty on paper, Maris said, jaw tight. Empty is their favorite shape. So we chose a different battlefield, the marsh itself. The founders' agreement Ada had described wasn't myth. It was embedded in old municipal charters. If the city had been built on negotiated ground, the negotiation could be reopened. Ela found an archivist at the university who had copies of the original Marsh Covenant, handwritten, with signatures and an official seal. The covenant included a clause that made lawyers blink. If the city forgets its water, the water may take its streets. Ada had always said the marsh resented straight lines. Now we asked, what if the marsh could be a witness too? We planned a public walk, not a protest march on asphalt, but a tide walk through the marsh border, where Readlight met the water. It was dangerous, muddy, unphotogenic, which is why it mattered. On a Saturday morning, Hundreds showed up at the eastern edge, boots and raincoats, children perched on shoulders, elders with canes. Tourists wandered over, curious. News cameras came, drawn by the novelty of conflict that involved mud. Reedlight residents led the way, moving along boardwalk planks and damp earth. Someone carried the countermap rolled like a banner. I carried the spiral stamp in a waterproof bag, feeling its weight like a pulse. At the marsh's edge, where reeds whispered, Maris raised her voice. "This is not empty," she said. "This is home," people echoed. "Not empty." The chant was softer than the promenade chant, but it sank deeper. Quaybridge representatives arrived in clean boots, looking uncomfortable, holding clipboards as if paper could repel mud. Sable Rook appeared too, raincoat crisp, face composed. "This area is slated for public safety improvements," she called, voice amplified by a portable speaker that sounded ridiculous in the open marsh. "Please remain on designated paths." Maris laughed. "Designated by who?" she shouted back. "By the same people who designated our street non-existent?" the crowd murmured. The marsh wind rose, carrying the smell of salt and peat. Then, something happened that no policy memo could predict. Water began to rise. Not a flood, not a storm surge, but a gentle, deliberate swell, as if the tide were arriving on schedule with extra intention. It lapped at the boots of Quaybridge's representatives. They stepped back, startled. The swell moved around Reedlight's boardwalks like it knew them, respecting the residents' paths. But it climbed over the neat survey stakes Quaybridge had planted. Their stakes fell one by one with soft plops, swallowed by mud. The crowd went silent, listening. In that silence, I felt the stamp in my bag grow warm. The marsh was responding, not as magic, but as logic. If the city used water as excuse, then water could become witness. The archivist Isla had brought stepped forward, holding the Covenant copy under plastic. "Read it," he urged, voice trembling. Isla took the document, cleared her throat, and read the clause about forgetting water and losing streets. Cameras zoomed in. Sable's face tightened. "That document is archaic," she snapped. "It is not binding." A voice from the crowd, an elder from Reedlight, called out, calm as tide. "Your contracts are archaic too. You just like them because they help you." Laughter rippled. I pulled the stamp out, stepped onto a flat stone at the marsh edge, and held it up. "Halcyon Quay remembers," I said, voice carrying in the damp air. "And we are stamping that memory into daylight." I pressed the stamp down onto a blank sheet of waterproof paper and wrote beneath the spiral, "Reedlight witnessed by water." People surged forward to sign, muddy hands leaving prints beside names. The paper looked like a messy petition. It was also a record. When we held it up, the wind caught it, and the reeds whispered like applause. Quaybridge retreated, not defeated, but temporarily out of script. And sometimes, out of script is the only opening you need. October arrived with storms, as it always did, and Halcyon Quay tried to behave as if nothing had changed. The mayor announced committees. Quaybridge announced community listening sessions. The council hall filled with language so polished it could slide off accountability. But the city's small systems began to shift in ways that were hard to reverse. Delivery apps updated their maps. Ambulance dispatch databases restored addresses. Utility crews, embarrassed by public scrutiny, repaired streetlights in places they had ignored. The borrowed street machine still existed, hidden in service corridors and server rooms, but it had to operate in a city that was watching its hands. Quaybridge fought back with lawsuits. They claimed the countermap was defamation. They filed injunctions to stop unauthorized projections. They tried to seize the spiral stamp, arguing it was municipal property. That last claim made me laugh, which was probably reckless. The stamp had become something else, not property, but symbol. Citizens began drawing spiral shells on their own mailboxes, their curbs, their shop signs, a quiet signal that said, "We are recorded." One night, I returned to the old cinema to find the projection room empty. The stamping desk cleared. Ada was gone, fully. But a new note sat where her stamp had been. "Custodians don't own the record. They hold it until the next hand is ready." I cried then, quietly, because grief finally found a safe place to land. In late October, the council scheduled a vote on the Marsh Safety Initiative relocation versus recognition. On the morning of the vote, Reedlight residents arrived in the council hall wearing muddy boots on purpose. It was a visual argument. "We are not clean enough for your plans, But we are real. Maris spoke first. She didn't yell. She didn't beg. She simply told the council what her street had survived. Floods, neglect, inspectors, paperwork. You can move buildings, she said. You can't move a neighborhood's spine without breaking it. Isla spoke about lives saved and lost. Dev spoke about infrastructure and the absurdity of pretending erasure was cheaper than repair. Then I stood at the podium with the countermap rolled under my arm and the spiral stamp in my hand. My voice shook at first, then steadied. A city is not a brochure, I said. It's a record of who is allowed to exist. I unrolled the map on the council table, covering the polished wood with lines and names. Gasps rose. Council members leaned in despite themselves. These are the borrowed streets, I said, pointing to red outlines. These are the blank spaces you've pretended were risk zones. They're neighborhoods, people. If you vote to relocate Reedlight, you are not mitigating flood risk. You are completing a borrowal cycle in daylight. A council member tried to object, but the gallery erupted. Exists. The chant bounced off walls. The mayor's face went pale. The vote happened anyway, because votes are what bureaucracy hides behind. But something unexpected occurred. 2 council members, usually aligned with Quaybridge, voted against relocation. One of them, a woman with tired eyes, said into her microphone, I received mail this week from an address my office has been calling invalid for years. I can't pretend anymore. The motion failed by 1 vote. Reedlight would not be relocated. Instead, the council passed a different measure. Official recognition of Reedlight as a protected heritage neighborhood, with infrastructure funds allocated for flood adaptation without displacement. It was not victory in the cinematic sense. It was paperwork. But this time, paperwork served people instead of erasing them. Outside the hall, rain began, soft at first, then steady. People opened umbrellas and laughed like they were learning a new habit. Maris hugged me hard enough to bruise. You did it, she whispered. We did it, I corrected, because the stamp in my hand felt too heavy for ego. That night, I walked along the promenade alone. The plaque where I had stamped the truth still bore the words Halcyon